Good afternoon. A very warm and toasty welcome to everyone on this a bit of a rainy evening. I'm Anindita. I'm from the foundation. I'm the executive trustee of the foundation. Regular sessions are conducted where words weave dreams of their own, and tales from each become equanimous bridges to new worlds of for some of us. Today's session is in association with Taj Bengal, as you all know, with the support of SAS Women of Kolkata. The media partner of today's event is My Kolkata. Today, it's an honor and privilege for us to have Neerja Chowdhury ji to grace the occasion with her presence in today's Authors Afternoon. We have Vidya Gajapati Raju, the SAS Women of Chennai, who is going to do the conversation with her. Those who are regular for Authors Afternoon, they know what Prabhaketan Foundation is. So I'm not, getting into what the foundation is and what it does. One thing I just want to mention here, the new things that the foundation keeps doing every time, and I'm sure all of you has got the video invite for this session. So there is something which has gone into the video invite. So there's a music which is there in the background of this music. I just want to say something about it. This music has been created by 3 times Grammy Award winner Ricky Cage. So Ricky is a very close associate of the foundation, and he has curated 12 music for us. And he's a very sustainable development environmentalist. He's a UN ambassador for that. So he has curated this music for us for 12 music. So each month's music depicts something or the other, which is into sustainable development or some kind of social message which creates. Music to us is an important art form that is of utmost importance. Ricky Cage has conceptualized and curated 12 pieces of music to be used as music of the month and composed the anthem of Prabhaketan Foundation. And the September's music is on Kaveri. The Kannada song expresses about the mother-like river Kaveri, born into the green mountains, feeds us without complaining, bathes us in her beauty, provides warmth and soothes our troubled minds with her gentle flow, yet we have taken the mother for granted for our own use. Now let me introduce you to our guest author for today, Neerja Chowdhury. Please, Neerja is an award-winning journalist, columnist, and political commentator. In the course of a distinguished career of over 40 years, she was political editor of the Indian Express for 10 years and covered the terms of 8 prime ministers and 10 Lok Sabha elections. She has won several prestigious awards for journalism, including the first Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Women Media Persons, the India Today PUCL Journalism for Human Rights Award, and the Prem Bhatia Award for Best Political Reporting. She is contributing editor, the Indian Express, and a weekly column, the Neerja Chowdhury column, is widely followed by participants and observers of contemporary Indian politics. In conversation, today we have Vidya Gajapati Raju. She is the Princess of Vijayanagaram, wedding planner, fitness enthusiast, columnist, blogger, and the SAS Women of Chennai. She is not only a multifaceted professional, but also a literary buff. Now, I would request you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Anindita ji. Lovely to be here and a great honor to be in conversation with Neerja ji here. And I think we have to thank you for coming all the way to Calcutta. For me, it was an absolute pleasure to be here because I love this city. And so happy when you invited us here. Thank you. And to plunge into the book, I think I read the book, Neerja ji, almost cover to cover, like I was studying for metric exam or something. It was amazing, a fascinating story, gripping, and each and every chapter is like a almost like a thriller as you read through the story and the stories that you have told us about each of the prime ministers. And I think this is a story that's being told for the first time in this way, chapter by chapter, dealing with each prime minister. And as you said in your book, it's a story that marks the coming of age and of the maturing of Indian democracy. I loved what you said about that. Could you tell us what prompted you to write this book and take it from there?
When we were having lunch, I must also start by saying thank you for having me. And I've been to your the function you arranged in Delhi, so I'm a little familiar with your members and their interests. And I would really like to, I would have liked to have chatted with each one of you individually uh, on a host of things, but thank you. Uh, when we were having lunch today, you said to me, will I read some parts of the book? Now, that is something I've not done at any of the events that I have gone to about the book. But I thought the answer to your first question, maybe I'll read a paragraph or so, which is in the introduction of my book, which should tell you why I wrote this book. And it also meets your requirement that I read maybe a couple of paragraphs.
I think it would be always nice to hear her voice read a bit of the story so it comes from her.
If an institution is an individual's long shadow, as has often been said, the Prime Minister's decision making casts a rare light on how governments work in our multi party, fractious democracy. For they not only sit at the top of the pyramid of power, they are at the center of ideas, navigating pressures, balancing competing claims, and grappling with the upsurge of ground level forces knocking at their doors. Each Prime Minister responded to these challenges in their own distinct style to shape and reshape India's democracy. This book is about power and is exercised by those who hold the highest public office. So I go into why, the lifting of the veil. Much has been written about politics, much has been written about prime ministers, their biographies, but how they make decisions, the pressures they come under, the machinations, the manipulations, the backstabbing, all that goes on and surrounds decision making. So I've tried to, as much as possible, to capture these competing pressures. And as I've said, lift the veil a little bit, which has not been done so far. And just a postscript, how you will ask me, but I'm going to preempt you about how this happened. So I write that many a time I had a ringside view of events as a journalist, doing these political stories, column writing, analyzing events. Waiting, in those years, sitting in, some of my friends are familiar with this, sitting in waiting rooms, waiting for players in government and political parties, and so on. And people who trusted me to give me that information. And something that was an article of faith with me was to keep faithfully notes. Even if I went to somebody, a cabinet secretary or a minister or even the prime minister, and whatever they would say, I would make notes. And these notebooks were stacked for those of you who want to do journalism or are into journalism. These books were stacked in my cupboard. I didn't get rid of a single one of them. And as I said, countless notebooks stacked away in forgotten almaras, thousands of pages of documents, studies, news reports, books, freed from the tyranny of the journalistic deadlines, I dived deep and resurfaced with treasures I was not even aware I had. To these, I added more interviews and further study to write this book. And during the COVID years, all the characters I've written about came to life and crowded my study. These 3 years, I don't know where they went. It was life. Um, my husband moved our computer table from the study on the second floor to the bedroom because I wouldn't have to do up and down at night. And so there was this computer table, there was the bed 3 feet away, and maybe 10 feet away is the dining table. So my life was this triangle for 3 years. रात को सोना दिन को मतलब रात को उठना दिन को सोना, it was just crazy. And as I say, I don't know, I really don't know how this book was done at one level. So as I revisited my conversations, I rediscovered the excitement of a high decibel drama, vibrant, constantly changing, always surprising. In the end, it helped me write a story that hasn't been told. A story of how India's prime ministers think and make decisions. A story that marks the coming of age and, for all its fault lines, the maturing of India's incredible democracy. So that's the way I look.
I think you summed it up beautifully over there. And I liked another sentence that you had in your book, that India's prime ministers have symbolized India's incredible diversity, representing different backgrounds, elite, rustic, North India, South India, minority, majority, Brahmin, backward, men, women. I thought that was an incredible point to pick up on the diversity, not just of our country, but representing the prime ministers of our country. Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yes, I've gone into, how many of them came from which region. Actually, it was something I suddenly started to think about. And how many of them came from Uttar Pradesh out of the 14? And from within Uttar Pradesh, how many came from Allahabad? 5. Allahabad was the hub of the freedom movement, the home of the Nehru Gandhi family, who played a very dominant role in the independence struggle in post-independent India. There have been 2 prime ministers from the south. There have been 2 prime ministers from the west, Morarji Desai and Narendra Modi. But there has not been a prime minister from the east so far, or the northeast of India. There hasn't been a prime minister who's a Dalit Muslim tribal yet, even as India's democracy evolves. And of course, you have a tribal woman as the president of India today. So it's a very, for all its fault lines, as I say, many faults, flaws, institutions under attack, all that's a reality. And yet there is a devolution of democracy going to those who have been, power going to those who have been on the peripheries of the power structure. So there are, there are parallel things going on. I don't know whether that's an answer to what you were asking.
It's interesting that you comment that, and also I think the 50 years of Indian politics that you've covered is a wide span of time, and I think you've seen it all through these
I sound
years.
really ancient.
No, not at all. It's incredible that don't look at it in that way, but it's incredible that you were there, present, and that you were able to record everything. There may have been other people in that place who maybe never wrote a single note, and you were able to keep it all, in your hand. Tell us something.
Yeah, this is,
You
as
did
I
say,
said, it's a habit as a journalist. I still, those of you who are younger, and most of you here are younger, you will laugh at me when I say, अगर मैं टेप रिकॉर्डर लेके जाती हूँ ना to interview, मुझे अभी भी डर लगता है. It will let me down. A simple tape recorder, forget the high polluting things that have now come with modern technology and free data, ये सब जो हो रहा है हमारे यहाँ, everywhere in the world. I went to interview Sonia Gandhi in 2004. And I took a simple tape recorder where my cousin taught me, ये दबाना है और ये दबाना है. And sure enough, in the middle of it, something went wrong. So had I not been taking notes simultaneously, I would have lost out on it. So I rely on my note taking more than anything else. So when I'm even, it's such a habit that if I'm talking, COVID years, we were talking on the phone a lot. Or even today, if I talk to people whose views I want, I on the phone. My habit is to immediately pick up the pen and because I don't want to lose the detail. And how people speak to you is that the turn of phrase is so interesting. How you paraphrase it will become very dull. That very thing in the words of people will be interesting. But I when I wrote this book, I really wanted to write for the millennials, for the younger people. My generation is walked down the memory lane. That's fine. And because I wanted to write for the millennials, I didn't want it to be a heavy going, I'm not an academic anyway, academic kind of a book. I wanted to write in a way because politics is drama, politics is suspense. So that is what I wanted to capture. I don't know whether I managed to do that, but that's really what I wanted. So when younger people tell me I'm reading your book, I really feel very thrilled.
You absolutely captured every moment of the drama because at every prime minister's story that you read, it's incredible. The way the whole story spells out is amazing.
I must tell you a very funny thing. 2 days ago, somebody was interviewing me, and this person said, you even mentioned the sari Mrs. Manmohan Singh was wearing at that dinner in Washington. And you mentioned the sari that Sonia Gandhi was wearing, the color of the sari. Now, maybe that's the woman in me, looking for that interested me, Here is Sonia Gandhi at the 4th anniversary of the UPA that they're celebrating, and she is the only color on the stage. Everybody is so drably dressed. And Mrs. Gulsharan Kaur's sari was commented in the Washington Post. They picked it up, so I picked it up from there. A male journalist might not have given importance to it.
So, shall we plunge into the first one, Indira?
Sorry?
Let's plunge into Indira Gandhi's story. Absolute fascinating account of her rise and fall also. And you had a fairly a sort of a detailed account of the draconian emergency and so much you brought in to her. I found a great empathy in you when you wrote about her actually, because you did have a touch of empathy towards all the things that she went through and what happened and how it all came to be. So could you comment on that?
I've written about 6 decisions by 6 prime ministers, and I've scrutinized them how they were made. For Indira Gandhi, I thought, do I write about Bangladesh, the creation of Bangladesh, very historic, it changed the geopolitics. Do I write about emergency, which was a low in Indira Gandhi's political career, where she suspended fundamental rights, press freedom, judiciary being tamed, and so on. And her son Sanjay Gandhi was the extra constitutional authority who emerged and influenced her decision making. Then I thought the most fascinating thing is why is she going for elections in 1977? She didn't have to do it. The economy was doing well. She had a grip over the situation. Why did she suddenly think of elections in which she was routed? And how did she come back to power in 33 months, having been routed? I don't think there's a parallel anywhere in the world of this happening. So to me, I thought this is what I want to explore. And I found 4 factors. Very quickly, I'll tell you. She first won over her major opponent to her side, Raj Narayan, who took who challenged her election in court, got her disqualified as an MP in 1975, and as a result of which she declared the emergency. She got him on her side, and he became a one-person demolition squad to bring down the Janata Party government. How did she do this? That's a very fascinating story how she did that. Then Jayaprakash Narayan, who led a movement in 1973-74 in Bihar, seeking her resignation, again something that led to the emergency, she neutralized him. She went to see him in 1977. From that meeting to the day he died, he did not say anything negative about her. Because he distinguished between political opposition to her policies from his personal relationship with her and her father. JP lived by very different values. Anyway, JP's wife, it's also very interesting, JP's wife, Prabhavati, was a very good friend of Indira Gandhi's mother, Kamala Nehru. And Kamala Nehru used to confide in her and had written her a whole lot of letters about the difficulties she was finding in the Nehru family, how the sisters treated her and all. And at the height of the Bihar movement, Jayaprakash Narayan, who had these letters, goes to meet Indira Gandhi and returns those letters. I want to have them. I don't want them to fall in the wrong hands, meaning that his colleagues with whom he was working. So anyway, JP, well, as I said, lived by different values, and but she managed to neutralize JP. And she managed to marginalize Jagjeevan Ram, who could have been the only person who could have prevented her return to power in 1980. He was being viewed as a possible prime ministerial candidate in place of Morarji Desai when there was disaffection against Morarji during the Janata regime. And there was a sex scandal, whether she was behind it or not, design or default. It there was this Mohan Baking company who produced Old Monk. They were very close to her. They managed to get the photographs, Babu Jagjeevan Ram's son in compromising positions. And they, at 1 o'clock at night, rushed those photographs to Indira Gandhi and Sanjay Gandhi. That also is a very fascinating story. But very important, and my last point, she Hinduized her politics. This is in 1977. From 77 to 80, she visited every major temple in the country. Partly because she was afraid for Sanjay that the Janata Party people will harm him or kill him, and partly because she wanted to offset the loss of support of the Muslims during the emergency to the Congress party. So she also reached out to the RSS. She wanted to use them, they wanted to use her. That's real politics. And she, as I say, if there was a prime minister who understood the nature of power, statecraft, I think it was Indira Gandhi more than anybody else. Narasimha Rao also, but Indira Gandhi.
She was born into politics because of her family background, and she lived through that even as a child, as a young girl, all of that. So I think probably a lot of lessons, life lessons learned through her childhood and her younger days. Now, shall we look at Rajiv now and see, as you named it in your book, Rajiv and his three failings. Could you elaborate a little bit about that? The decisions that set off the forces that fashion the politics of the next 3 decades with his decisions.
When Rajiv, for those of you who are older, I don't know whether any of you remember when Rajiv came to power as an accidental prime minister after the assassination of his mother. Morning he was campaigning in West Bengal. By 7 o'clock he'd taken over as Prime Minister of India. He was, and he didn't want to, when he entered politics, it was after his brother's death, Sanjay's death. And he didn't want to, he was a very reluctant entrant. But When he became Prime Minister, he did some very remarkable things. Brought down the voting age to 18. He enacted the anti-defection law. He had accords on problems that had bedeviled his mother, Assam Accord, Punjab Accord, Mizoram Accord, six technology missions. So he wanted, as he would say, he wanted to take India into the 21st century. Then came the Shah Banu judgment. Now, it's very strange if you look at every prime minister's term, you'll find big doors swing on little hinges, little pivots which have swung Indian politics. Indira Gandhi's case, court judgment, Rajiv Gandhi court judgment, and so on. If I look at go down the line, but in Rajiv's case, this judgment provided for alimony to an old Muslim woman divorced by her husband. She had 5 children. The court took cognizance of it. Court ordered इसको 25 रुपए महीना दो. And then the Muslim community was up in arms that it is interference in the personal law. And the judgment had also talked about enacting the Uniform Civil Code, that also they found objectionable. So, to undo the damage done by the Shah Banu judgment, Rajiv brought in a bill, Muslim Women Bill, which this act would not, of the CRPC, would not apply to the Muslim. That section was meant for destitute people, not only for Muslim women, but that apart. Then the Hindus got angry and agitated. So to please them, he got the locks of the Babri Masjid open for unfettered worship to be done by the Hindus. You know, these locks had been put in 1950 after the idol of Ram had been surreptitiously smuggled into the Babri Masjid in 1949. And then an administrative decision had been taken, and year after year, they would apply that let us open the locks and the courts will rule it out. But this year, the courts said yes, and it was engineered by those in government, and Rajiv wanted it open. Now, he neither pleased the Hindus nor did he please the Muslims. He fell between two stools. And his majority came down from 414 seats, unprecedented till today, to 197. So Rajiv Gandhi, who was so futuristic in his vision, fell between the stools of caste and community, and he did not understand India and the hold that this had on people's psyche. So, politically naive, well-meaning, forward-looking, and so Sonia Gandhi had said to Rajiv, this also I start the chapter with this. She said, Rajiv, if you can't convince me of the Muslim Women Bill, how are you going to convince the country? But Rajiv sort of flip-flop, and that story is all there. And the role Arun Nehru played in his politics, he was with him and then fell out. Vishwanath Pratap Singh was his finance minister, fell out. Bofors came on the scene, and then, of course, it was downward journey for Rajiv Gandhi.
Association with Chowdhury and his family. I think all of these factors played into sort of the end for him.
Was that he was out of power, but that was not to be.
Had he come back to power.
Come back, but that was not to be.
Let's have a touch for a few minutes on the demolition of the Babri Masjid, which was in December 1992, I think. 6th December. As you name it, it was a defining moment in Indian history. I think that's an interesting. We've all lived through it. I remember watching TV with those people on top of the domes, knocking it down. Give us your comments on that.
And till today we don't know who these people were. None of them have been punished, or we don't know. It's one of, or even in 1949, when that idol was smuggled, Nobody has been punished, or, we don't even know. For all the intelligence agencies and the investigation and the commission that went into it. So, Narasimha Rao was again start the chapter by four journalists going to see Narasimha Rao 2, 3 days after the demolition took place. They were led by Nikhil Chakravarti, very eminent journalist, and he was the editor of this magazine, Mainstream, and three other Prabhat Joshi of Jansatta and of Blitz, Mishra, R.K. Mishra of Blitz, and Ram Bahadur Rai. And Nikhil Chakravarti was a friend of Narasimha Rao also, and had known him when Narasimha Rao was Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh. Said, we heard, he was part teasing him, he said, we heard you were doing puja when people were bringing down the masjid. So Narasimha Rao was stung. He said, Dada, he used to address Nikhil Chakravarti as Dada. You think I don't know Rajniti? I was born in Rajniti. And I allowed this to happen because the BJP would lose its main plan, words to that effect. Now, others say, I quote people who say they had talked to RSS chief and the head of the BJP years later. And during a conversation, they had said that we had alerted Narasimha Rao that this is going to happen, so you get ready for any eventuality. So Narasimha Rao, was he complicit in this decision? Did he just allow it to happen? Could he have done more? All that I've gone into. And again, Narasimha Rao is a prime minister. When he took up PM-ship, the economy was in shambles. It was a huge crisis, balance of payment crisis. He stabilized that. Within hours, he hadn't even been sworn in when he had to take this decision on the economy. In a year, it stabilized that situation. The Soviet Union had collapsed. It was a unipolar world he had to contend with. He made overtures to the Central Asian republics, look east policy. He calmed down the temperatures in Punjab, held elections there, Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, the other day, at the launch of the book in August in Delhi, uh, Rajdeep Sardesai was anchoring the program, and there was a political panel. So he asked them this question: who's your favorite prime minister? Who's the best prime minister? So Sharad Pawar, who was there, he said Narasimha Rao. Very interesting answer. Now, Narasimha Rao, many consider, he knew India, erudite. Of course, as Jairam Ramesh has said, as charismatic as a dead fish. So he couldn't get mass support. But that apart, but this one blocked, allowing the Babri Masjid to go, even though it was a disputed structure, because what it did was to hurt the psyche of the Muslims that the Indian state and the Indian constitution had not been able to protect them or their rights. And that sentiment has continued. Where it's going to head, we don't know. What's going to be the ultimate outcome of this process? Unless, an attempt is made to reach out to them in a different way.
I think one of the things you do say in the book about this particular Babri Masjid is that it was like a festering sore that once it was taken out, a lot of situation was diffused because it was gone. It didn't exist anymore, and there was nothing more to dispute over there. So that was
the reason what he gave, and that happened in his premiership. The masjid went on the back burner. Even 1 year down the line, Narasimha Rao won state elections in North India, 1 year after the demolition. But Hindu nationalism reared its head in a very different way because the BJP had tasted blood. And Narasimha Rao, again I've quoted people, Narasimha Rao wanted to build a temple himself at that very spot. Then he got his aides to register a trust. He reached out to all manner of Hindu organizations in the country. By 1995, the trust had been registered, and he decided not to go ahead. He said, he went the Hawala route for elections. He said, if I come back to power, we'll see.
I think the other interesting comment on this was about what Chandrasekhar said, that he would have allowed the army to shoot at the car sevaks. That's a frightening thought. I'm glad it didn't happen. But in your book,
Yeah, I once was talking to Chandrasekhar. Uh, he was not prime minister. He demitted office. It was after that. And we were talking of what could have been done to save the Babri Masjid. After all, there were 3 lakh car sevaks in Ayodhya at that time. What could have been done should have been done much earlier, before they gathered there. And that had been done in 1990 by Mulayam Singh Yadav. Not allowing car sevaks to come into the town. Then, of course, the army was stationed, was not used. Narasimha Rao didn't resort to Article 356, President's rule in the state, which would have given center the control of the state, even for a short time. All those options he didn't exercise. But I asked Chandrasekhar, what would you have done? He said, I would have not allowed the masjid to be brought down, even if I had to shoot people and 2,000 people had died.
glad he could not do that in a way. That would have created, I think, a far worse situation.
So that's something you're quoting.
You're quoting from your book. So there's so many, actually, we are getting a little short of time, but we have a couple of more interesting points. VP Singh and the Mandal and Mandal Commission and the Mandir. Maybe you can just give us a very brief comment on that before we move into.
What I say in the book, it's popularly believed that Mandir was a response to Mandal. Reservation to the OBCs, which Vishwanath Pratap Singh went in for to save his beleaguered government. That was in August 1990. What I have documented is that Mandal was a response to Mandir. Politics of Mandir, and Vishwanath Pratap Singh trying to craft the politics which would take on the BJP by empowering the OBCs, which is going on even till today. In Bihar, it is Lalu Prasad Yadav, Nitish Kumar coming together. There's a caste basis to counter BJP's religion basis. So, and even the Rath Yatra was not a response to Mandal, because Govindacharya, who was involved in all these processes, had said, we decided on the Rath Yatra in June of that year. Mandal took place in August. जून में हमने तय कर लिया था, हम रिवील नहीं करेंगे कि सितंबर में रथ यात्रा होगी, कार सेवा होगी, and all that. That we had not, but and that timetable played according to the script. So that is that is another thing I've gone in for. But Vishwanath Pratap Singh lasted 11 months. For whatever reason, he went in for Mandal, and there were several factors. He changed the face of Indian politics. The rise of the OBCs, and it's an aspirational revolution that was taking place, and he tapped into it. Is a phenomenon that's going on. Today you have most backwards wanting their share amongst the OBC. You want Mahadalits wanting their share amongst the Dalits. You have Pasmanda Muslims wanting their share amongst the Muslims. As I said, power is moving downwards. So VP Singh gave a dhakka to that process.
Just a hypothetical question. You talk about each prime minister during the period when they ruled. What would have happened in your thoughts if, for instance, they had been switched in time frames or something? I mean, it's just a hypothetical, very hypothetical question. You could just very briefly say something.
Manmohan Singh was there in 1977 when Indira Gandhi lost.
Yes.
I think he would have gone home. He would have, like Indira Gandhi initially thought of retiring to the Himalayas. He would have retired. Though when he enacted this Indo-US nuclear deal, for 39 months, Manmohan Singh showed a side to him which nobody thought existed. Again, Sam Dam, Dand Bhed, every book in the book. He, Sonia Gandhi's opposition, left party's opposition, he, used fixers, national, international, and he saw it through. So there was a killer instinct, a political savvy about him, which we didn't think existed. But that's the only decision where we saw this side of Manmohan Singh. Otherwise, it was Sonia Gandhi taking the political decisions.
Absolutely. I think all of you will have to read the book because there are so many subjects in each chapter that it's just a fascinating account. I was enchanted reading. I would say enchanted, but I was enthralled reading the book. It's quite amazing. And a couple of things we haven't even touched: Vajpayee and the bomb, nuclear bomb. So many. How did all that come out? I think maybe you could just give us in a few sentences something, and then I can see.
Vajpayee is a loved character. And I sometimes think Vajpayee is probably the most overrated prime minister if you look at his achievements during his premiership. But the nuclear testing, which took India to the global high table, but he used to say this was done by Narasimha Rao. Every preparation was done. I only had to press the button. It had come to T3 stage. Because the information leaked, Narasimha Rao decided not to do it in 1995, and then 96 Vajpayee considered, but 13-day government, 98 he went in for it. But Vajpayee is loved because he was a moderate in a right-wing party. And he's loved because it's not what he did, but what he was. And what he was and what that represented for governance in India. He was a middle roader. He believed India had to be run by consensus. So that is the significance of Vajpayee.
Like the bomb, there are many, many subjects that Neerja ji touches in the book. It's just an incredibly fascinating account, and we're grateful that you actually kept all those notes so we can read the book that you've given us now. And Anandita ji, shall we ask if anyone would like to ask questions to Neerja ji? Please feel free.
Good afternoon, Neerja ji. Can't wait to get my hands on the book. If you were to, with your fantastic experience and notes and looking back, reflecting, you got a chance to put it all together. If you were to summarize India's finest moments in the democracy and its deepest failings, what would they be?
Finest moments
Of democracy and deepest failings. Thank you.
What I find very exciting, I must say personally, and I would think you all would also find it exciting, is the incredible diversity of India. She talked about the Prime Minister representing that. I love covering elections. Because when you hit the road every 10, 20 kilometers, it's a different India. How you dress, how you speak, who you eat, what you believe in, the gods you worship. कुछ इतना अलग है. I don't think any country in the world is as diverse as India. And this country has held together. It's held together as a democracy. People used to think, कि नहीं हो पाएगा, backward country, poor country. And as I say again and again, there are the fault lines, there are the institutions under attack, and yet we still muddle along as a democracy. And every prime minister has contributed to that in the way they made decisions. for all their faults. The decision making, what I've said at the end, there are two takeaways for me after this book. One is that decisions in India are very ad hoc. Every prime minister has thought of how to wrest power or to retain power, how to survive, immediately to survive. 50 साल के बाद क्या होगा, क्या इसका impact होगा, they haven't thought. They have thought, but the decision has been triggered off by that. And yet there has been a contribution that, as I say, the maturing of Indian democracy that has taken place and power moving downwards. So those are there is the underbelly, there's the ugly and underbelly of Indian politics. Money, power for the sake of power. It started in Indira Gandhi's term, power at any cost. And this period that I have looked at was the laboratory in some ways. But where are we headed? That's the other takeaway of mine. That India is a coalition. It must be run like a coalition. This complete variety, color, religion, races, ethnicities, itna kuch hai. It must be done like a coalition. Whether it's a brute majority government, whether it's a simple majority government, whether it's an alliance government. And the last person must have a voice. So the best moments are when prime ministers have tried to run it like that. The worst moments are when power and other considerations take over. And yet we stay very optimistic.
Thank you so much.
So there are two questions. One on a lighter note is like when ma'am said that Rajiv Gandhi and three failings. Was this somewhere compared to Muhammad bin Tughlaq and his failures? Was there at the back of the mind?
What?
Muhammad bin Tughlaq and his failures in history.
And its failure.
The Muhammad bin Tughlaq. So it's
Mohammed bin Tughlaq.
yes, because
And failures compared
to Rajiv Gandhi and the three failings, because Muhammad bin Tughlaq also had three failings. So I thought, was it somewhere closely related?
I'll have to study Mohammed bin Tughlaq to be able to compare Gandhi with it. But I must say, if you many people ask me this question: who's your favorite prime minister, or which is the prime minister who did
Would
good
not
by
happen.
India?
This is my second question. That who do you think India missed as a prime minister?
Miss.
Missed. India could not get as a prime minister.
But there are many who feel there's a Pranab Mukherjee.
According to you, ma'am, your personal, according to your personal
I would have liked to have seen Pranab Mukherjee as prime minister
Yes, ma'am.
because he was a good administrator. He understood India. He had huge experience, a phenomenal memory. You went to him and he would quote from the Constitution. I said, "Raat mein aap utha dete unko." He could have done that. He was that. They went to him for troubleshooting all the time. So yes, I think Pranab Mukherjee is the prime minister India didn't have. L.K. Advani is the prime minister India didn't have. Could have had.
Vallabhbhai Patel, maybe.
Huh?
Vallabhbhai Patel, maybe.
Vallabhbhai Patel. By the way, I end my book with Vallabhbhai Patel and Nehru. Not the story of how Nehru became prime minister and was preferred by Gandhi in place of Vallabhbhai Patel because the PCCs, the state committees, had recommended Patel's name and nobody had recommended Nehru's name. And Gandhi chose Nehru for a variety of reasons. He was more popular, Gandhi felt that the transition from British rule to a sovereign nation would be more smoothly handled, he felt, by Nehru for a variety of reasons. And Patel and Nehru were like this. And yet, after Gandhi's death, how they came together, despite the differences in those 3 years. Suppose you had them like this. Could you have handled the 14 million refugees across the border?
Yeah.
Could you have integrated the princely states into Indian nation? Could you have had a kind of constitution that we have? Adult franchise, liberal principles. They differed on many issues. But because they decided to move in step after Gandhi's death, and that story is this is from Rajmohan Gandhi's book on Patel, but it's my favorite story about what leadership is all about.
Can one
yes,
ask
Patel-
one quick question? Is there time? Okay, I just wanted to ask that the current Prime Minister, in the current time, we seem to be doing a lot that is completely different from anything that has gone before. So, is that moving in the right direction? Does this time pose a problem for democracy? I think Supriya asked a question about democracy. How is India changing the democratic India that we've grown up with the idea of?
There's little doubt that Narendra Modi has brought about a paradigm shift in Indian politics. It's a complete, and he looms so large in people's consciousness. I debated doing him. I wrote a draft. I did some work, and very soon I realized the trouble I would run into. Because, it's not about him. People around the incumbent prime minister will not talk freely. And the people who talked to me about other prime ministers did so after the prime ministers had demitted office, not while they were in power. So I realized I will not be able to do justice to him, and that it's something I must leave for the future. But certainly he's brought huge changes in India. Certainly the opposition feels that he's decimating democracy, institutions. Uh, there are things, there is also the democratization that he represents. As I say, a chaiwala can rise to the ranks, to the pinnacle of power in our country. It's like Lalu Yadav. लालू यादव कहते थे जब मैं पाकिस्तान गया तो लोग मेरे को यूं फील करते थे कि भाई आर यू रियलिटी इज इट ट्रू दैट इन इंडिया यादव वाला कैन बिकम चीफ मिनिस्टर through the electoral process. So also with Modi, that is democratization. But our institutional framework, our institutions need to be strengthened, no matter who the prime minister. The moment you have a powerful prime minister with a brute majority, with everybody dependent on him to win elections, there is going to be concentration of power. It happened during Indira Gandhi's time. It's happening in Narendra Modi's time. And as he makes a bid for a third stint in power, 10 saal ho gaye, and still people are looking. I mean, I'm talking to taxi drivers coming here. They still look at him. Partly because there's no alternative, but for other reasons also. They say he's given new respect to India in the World Forum. He promises political stability. He's 24/7 for us. He has no family in tow. And there is yet the flip side also. So how would history judge him? It's too early. I also did not write on him because it's a work in progress. It's very difficult to judge without the benefit of hindsight, as I had with the other prime ministers.
Thank you so much.
I had two questions, but very short. One is, I do not want to know which prime minister you like the most. I want to know which which prime minister did you like most as a person, not the politics.
Personally.
Yes, as a person, as an individual. And the second is, you talked a lot about the 90s, but you didn't mention liberalization. So I was wondering, in my head, I find three moments very important. which is Babri Masjid, of course, liberalization, and Pokhran. So, out of these three, which do you think has had the greatest far-reaching consequence and impact on India as a whole?
Long term.
Long term, yeah.
Uh, who do I like personally? I find this very difficult question. Always,
Who do you admire most as an individual? That is what I meant.
there are pros and cons to each one of them, to be honest. But I often say I'm most fascinated by Indira Gandhi. Fascinated partly because I'm a woman and she's a woman, therefore a woman making it to the top, getting the better of her opponents in very difficult circumstances, internally, externally, getting the better of them. You had the 7th Fleet in the Bay of Bengal after Bangladesh. She didn't, she took it. So she had enormous courage, and I've come to the conclusion that courage makes for charisma. And and yet there were new laws that she took the country. The moral degeneration in politics was during her term. Power for the sake of power, her becoming larger than the party, direct reach to the masses, all that happened in her term. So, but yet she's fascinating. There is no good or bad to it. It's just that I find her very fascinating. I found all prime ministers fascinating as I studied them more. But yes, her. But likes, I don't really honestly know the answer. Who's good? I can't say like Sharad Pawar, Narasimha Rao, or somebody else.
And about those three moments I mentioned.
Pokhran, very important because it established India. As I said, the world took India seriously. That was the reason Brajesh Mishra, who was the principal secretary of Vajpayee, and was considered de facto prime minister because he would take all the nitty-gritty decisions. Vajpayee would leave it to him. But he had told Vajpayee when they were considering this, the West will take us seriously if we do this, apart from everything else that we want to go ahead with. Uh, Liberalization, yes, it's a major decision that Narasimha Rao took, and he took it the night before he was sworn in. Such was the crisis when the bureaucrats went to him. And he said to these two people who went to see him, "Acha nahi hai, main sign karta hu." So, and of course, we are on that path, opening up of the economy and so on. So, both were very critical decisions. Which was more important? History will be a better judge of that.
Thank you.
A bit of a fun in it. We heard when we were having lunch, we heard that you always were inside the parliament. Any funny moments, funny thing which has happened while you were inside the parliament? Can you just tell us? I'm sure there would have been a lot of funny moments which has happened.
Yeah, Parliament was, there's a place called Central Hall of Parliament. You probably heard of it. That's where the Constituent Assembly met and they adopted the Constitution. And major decisions have been held there. The President speaks to both houses of Parliament there. And but it's the biggest gossipery and eatery in town. वहाँ brewed coffee मिलती है, and Indira Gandhi, that the coffee place, there's a tea board and there's a coffee board. Used to be, अब तो पुरानी building हो गई, and they moved very recently into the new building. वहाँ Central Hall नहीं है. Central Hall का rule जो होता था कि you could talk to people and it is understood कि this is off the record. You are not to use it. So people from across parties, we could see Arun Jaitley talking to Chidambaram. So क्या हो रहा है? When Gadkari was deprived of party presidentship, it would not be continued, and cases started to come out against his company. We all said ये तभी hatch किया था when these two were meeting. Chidambaram helping. Anyway, I heard Pramod Mahajan, पूरा session निकल गया, stall, 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 nothing was functioning. And I heard Pramod Mahajan, who was parliamentary affairs minister during Vajpayee's term, saying to group of opposition leaders, अच्छा बस बहुत हो गया ना. अब you have sent your signals that you wanted to your party leaders. अब बात करते हैं, असली में चाहिए क्या? बैठो. How do we make parliament function? Sushma Swaraj is no longer alive, heard fantastic, phenomenal speeches in 1996 in Parliament. और जब मैं उसके बाद अडवाणी की रथ यात्रा थी, and I went to उड़ीसा, and रात के 1 बजे मीटिंग में लोग बैठे हुए थे, and Advani started to speak, it was okay. Sushma got up to speak, it was electrified the atmosphere. Why? Because people had heard her in those months, when Narasimha Rao went out of power, Atal Bihari Vajpayee came into power, then he couldn't get a majority, he went out of power, then Deva Gowda came into power and was sworn in. The transitions that were taking place. That was also a marvelous thing. How in a country, when you lose, transition takes place smoothly without any violence taking place? That's been a very wonderful tradition, but that, is not humorous part of what you asked for. But Arun Jaitley would come and hold a does every day. So when he wanted to plant certain things, all the journalists would rush to where he was sitting, coffee would be ordered, but everybody, Indira Gandhi ke liye, I was telling you, 9 baje coffee board, tray sajake, coffee, freshly brewed coffee, which she loved, used to go when she was Prime Minister. But this coffee is a coffee and toast was a staple in Central Hall. Dosa bhi milta tha sham ko. Khichdi bhi milti thi khane ke time. And at one time very subsidized. Now, of course, a few other things have come. But, and this chat would go on. He would chat about आप तुम abroad गए तो तुमने पेन लिया तो all kinds of brands उससे लेके what the opposition was doing, what Rahul Gandhi was doing, what so everything would be discussed under the sun. Ghanta bhar he would know it is adda, and everybody loved it. Of course, partly he was planting things on you, giving information, but it was it is really the warp and woof of democracy at one go. I find Central Hall nahi hona nahi, Parliament is a shrinking of the democratic space where you can talk across. All this talk we didn't use in our stories, but it gave us a deeper understanding of what was going on. So also they could talk across the board, across the divide, Congress to BJP to how to resolve things sometimes and so on. Now there are very few places where you can directly meet people and dialogue is so essential in a democracy.
Nowadays, no gossips inside Parliament. Nowadays, no gossips inside Parliament. Gossips?
Gossip, now we don't know. That's the idea not having central hall. The gossip is all gone. And the eatery is also not there. It used to be Darjeeling brewed tea. मैं बात कर रही थी ना आपसे कि brewed just beautifully those 2-3 drops of milk. दूसरी चाय भी मिलती थी, but this also was a specialty of Parliament at one time. Anyway, those are memories now.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm Farhan. I look after sales and marketing for Target in Calcutta. Firstly, thank you for this lovely session. Vidya, thank you for joining, ma'am. I would want to invite Ms. Datta on behalf of Taj Bengal and Prabhakar Foundation to come and present you with a small token of our appreciation.
Yes.
Thank you.